Welcome to the Silco Theater and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our monthly history program here at the Silco Theater. Every month, the Silver City Museum brings you a local history topic, followed by discussion and conversation about how it all relates to our lives today. This is the second of 3 programs exploring the theme of local government. It is part of our ongoing investigation of Silver City's history, Silver City 101, that began a couple years ago. Today, we are here to delve into the topic of labor union activity in Grant County. Our very knowledgeable speaker, Terry Humble, will share his memories and perspectives from growing up in Grant County and working in the copper mining industry for many decades. I would just like to tell you that this program today comes to you after an enormous amount of effort and training and new equipment. We have really been working solidly on improving every time the quality of the program, building on the efforts of my predecessor, Aaron Griffin. My name is Kathleen Norman. I'm the programs coordinator for the museum, and I'm new to this role. I moved to Silver from Colorado Springs last year. My professional background includes many projects in Colorado history and historic preservation. Several of my clients were historic mining towns where labor union activity was a huge part of their history. So this topic personally fascinates me. And before we start, I'd like to thank the museum staff and the volunteers who all pitched in to bring you this program. And thank you very much to the Silco Theater and Kim. I'd like to thank our partner, Will, the Western Institute of Lifelong Learning, who promotes this as part of their Lunch and Learn series. And we have someone from Will who's going to say a word on behalf of the organization. Mary Stecker. Hello, Mary.
Hello, Kathleen. Okay, thank you. Again, my name is Mary Stecker, and along with Alan Reagans, who's over on one of the computers, we are the co-coordinators for the Western Institute for Lifelong Learning's Lunch and Learn series, which we are really happy that over the past few years, we've been able to fold in with the museum's what are you calling them now? The community partnerships, community conversations. That's right. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I did want to quickly mention the upcoming Lunch and Learn. It'll be next Wednesday on October 26th over at the Global Resource Center ABC rooms. And I'm going to go ahead. Well, actually, Mr. Fox, he's right over there. Steve Fox, raise your hand. Steve is going to be coming up with a fun topic here. Let me read it to you. Tom Lyons, the murderous cattle baron of Grant County. So there. Anyway, we hope you can join us for that. And that's from 12 to 1. We do our time a little bit differently than the museum. So we'll be beginning at noon, the ABC rooms, Global Resource Center, Wednesday, October 26th. And Steve Fox will be presenting. Thank you very much. Pardon me? 11 o'clock. No, it's at 12 noon. Yeah, 12 noon on Wednesday, right. It's 11 o'clock on Saturdays, 12 noon on the Wednesday Lunch and Learns. And by the way, if you go to will.community or will.community/$/lunch learn, you'll be able to see the materials about all of these 6 sessions, 3 with the museum partnership and 3 on the Wednesday Lunch and Learns. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. I'd also like to thank our other partner, which is LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the largest and oldest Hispanic civil rights group in the country. LULAC started in 1928 and has 132,000 members today. And we'll hear a little bit more about that. And the state director, Fred Baca, will be our panelist speaking today. Thank you to our sponsors, Little Toad Creek Brewery and the Southwest Word Fiesta, and also the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. As you came in, you may have noticed a donation jar. These programs are free, but we suggest a $5 donation. So if you have any extra jingle in your pocket, consider dropping it in the jar and back, or we have a tip jar up here too, a tip jar. And a little bit about Silver City Museum. We do welcome your membership and we welcome you as volunteers. You saw some information on the table up front as you came in. We very much appreciate, again, our membership and volunteers. And then the final thing, housekeeping. Please be sure your cell phones are muted. And as you maybe already know, the bathrooms are at the back near the lobby. Our program today will consist of our speaker, Terry Humble, followed by a question and answer period, and then we'll have a panelist discussion. And the panelists actually will be Terry himself and Fred Baca, and I'm going to sit in on the panel too. We had invited a gentleman from the Silver City Fire Department, but he had another obligation and wasn't able to join us. As you might know, our local fire department is union. So today we're focusing on the Empire Zinc strike that started in 1950, and we chose this topic to coincide with the opening of our Arturo Flores exhibit over at the museum. If you haven't seen it, please do visit the museum to see the wonderful photographs and Arturo's own words about his experience during the Empire Zinc strike and during his decades of activism and activity as a labor union organizer. And now I have a little bit of a lengthy introduction for a very humble man. Terry Humble is sharing his memories and perspectives from living most of his life in Grant County and being employed in the mining industry for many decades. For the past 13 years, he has given a monthly mining tour on the Corres Caminos bus, talking about the underground mines of Vanadium, Hanover, and Santa Rita. And I learned a lot from Terry taking that tour last summer. Terry was born and raised in the mining camp, the no longer existent mining camp of Santa Rita, 14 miles east of Silver City. He attended grade school in Santa Rita and high school in Bayard. After graduating in 1959, he joined the U.S. Navy and spent 4 years as an aviation jet mechanic. Upon discharge, he served as an apprentice in Los Angeles as a diesel mechanic and then returned to Grant County to work at the mines in 1963. First working several years underground as a hard rock miner, then he went into the open pit at the Santa Rita as a heavy equipment mechanic. Terry spent 38 years in the mining business, working locally and in Peru before he retired in 2001. He has been very interested in recording histories, saving documents, and participating in the research and preservation of local history. He's published several journal articles on local history and has co-authored 4 books on Santa Rita, Grant County, and underground mining. He co-authored Santa Rita del Cobre, a copper mining community in New Mexico, published by University Press of Colorado, and he co-authored Silver City as part of the Images of America series. These are both for sale in our Silver City Museum gift shop. He also partnered with Christopher Saxman to produce Relics of the Underground Metal Miners, a pictorial history which is now out of print, but is available for reference at our local library. So without much further ado, I will introduce to the stage Terry Humble. Thank you, Terry. Very glad you're joining us.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the fantastic introduction. I almost didn't recognize myself. And thank the Museum Society and their partners, the Lulac and Will and the Silco Theater for letting me be here. I'd like to start off by going back a little bit and getting a good start on where the unions began in Grant County. All the way back to 1934, the mine, mill, and smelter workers started forming the unions. They had Local 63 in Santa Rita and Local 69 in Hurley. And they were organizing and getting all set up in 1934, which of course was the Depression years. Everybody was having problems. Anyway, let's try it again. Yeah, the mine was trying to stay open, but they were not making any money. because of the depressed copper prices. And because the unions were starting to organize, the big boss, Dan Jackling, decided to shut her down. Now, Jackling was the CEO and the chamber of the board of some of the major copper mining companies in the Southwest, and in fact is the whole United States. And so he sent a telegram to Chino and said, shut her down. Now, naturally, this was partway because of the economic conditions, but it was very much because they were afraid the unions were going to get completely organized, and they did not want that. They were very, very against the unions. So Chino Mines at Santa Rita and Hurley, they're shut down for 2.5 years because of the depression. Copper prices finally go back up. They reopened in January 1937, and the unions began reorganizing. There again, the Local 63 and Local 69. And this was in the early 1940s. And by 1950, I guess I should back up a little bit. In the early 1940s, 63 and 69 went together and formed the Local 890 of the mine, mill, and smelter workers. And then by the 1950s, all of the mines in Grant County, the major mines, of course, were had the unions representing their workers. And these mines were the major mining companies, would have been Empire Zinc, the United States Smelting and Refining Company, just called the U.S. Mines, the Peru Mining Company, Asarco, and of course Kennecott. Those were the major companies, and they all were represented by 890. The mines exclusively by 890, of course, Kennecott had other unions other than the Local 890. Empire Zinc, which is primarily what we're talking about today, were represented by the Local 890. All of these different companies that had contracts with the union, they were not at the same time. Their contracts were staggered. In October of 1950, when the contract came up for Empire Zinc, the union went to the company to start negotiating. They asked for basically three things: 15 cents an hour wage raise. They wanted collar to collar pay, and I'll explain that in a minute. And they wanted a couple of more paid holidays. The collar to collar pay, your collar is right at the surface where the head frame sits on your underground mines. When the men get on the cage to go down into the mine at the collar, they're on the clock. And when they come back out, that's the end of their shift. All of the other mines, except Empire Zinc, paid their men collar to collar. They went underground for 8 hours. Empire Zinc required their workers to eat their lunch on their own time. So therefore they were underground for 8.5 hours and unpaid for that. And this was it had always been a contention. And Empire Zinc wanted equality with the other mines. Well, the company basically told them, what you have is what you're going to get, and not a thing else. So the union went on strike. They set up two picket lines, one just north of the intersection with Highway 356 and 152, and the other one at the other edge of the property, a little further north, up by the Hanover Bridge. And the men walked this picket line for almost 8 months, stopping production completely before the problems really began. In June of 1951 is when all the problems really started. The company got got a Marshall I should say, they got a judge named Marshall in Silver City to pass an injunction against these striking minors, saying that they could not block the road. Well, if you can't block the road, you've basically lost your cause. And so they knew there was going to be trouble. And the company had decided at this point that they were going to try to reopen the mine. So they approached the Grant County Sheriff's Office and they said, you need more deputies. Well, the Grant County Sheriff's Office doesn't have enough funds to get deputies, but they hired 24 deputies. Who paid for them? Empire Zinc. In this day and age, that doesn't seem very fair, and it sure wasn't at that time. So we've got 24 deputies that are, along with some of the irregular Grant County deputies, they're up at the picket line early that first morning after the injunction was passed. State police have been warned about it. So Joe Roach, the chief of police in Santa Fe, has pulled 13 of his state police out and sent them down to Grant. Okay, looks like we're back in action here. So we've got this just about the time the sun comes up and everybody's in place. The men are walking the picket line. They've got their placards. As soon as they step out onto the highway, the state police didn't get involved in that part. They were just standing back in case the deputies start arresting these men. About 12 of the men had got arrested, but by this time, of course, the word was out, and here came the women. And we're talking about women from all over Grant County, not just Empire Zinc, from every place in the county. Grandmothers, girlfriends, wives, aunts, and they grabbed up the placards and stepped out and set up the picket line. The injunction said nothing about women. It was specifically for the men. Well, the trouble began. These women were tear gassed, arrested, and taken to jail. Actually, there was there's all kinds of different figures of how many women and children were jailed, but the closest figure would be about 60. So we've got 12 men in jail. We've got 60 women and men that have been arrested after being tear gassed. And this is an international incident. It's so unusual for women to be on a picket line. This news went all over the world. I bet you there were people in Afghanistan wondering, where the heck is Hanover, New Mexico? Time magazine, Life magazine, they sent reporters down to cover this. We were big news. So we're into July and into the summer after this all started. The women are still on the line because they had to let them out of jail. They were raising so much trouble. They figured it was the easiest thing to do was to let them go. But we've got hearings, suspended sentences. All these people are out on bond. It's just a terrible time. It split this county right down the middle. To this day, you can talk to somebody that was here and you'll know immediately which side they were on. It had the Hispanics against the Anglos. The merchants were fighting. If you were at a store and the union people were dealing with you, the non-union people would not deal with that particular store. So the merchants were split down. It was a terrible time. The governor of New Mexico offered to mediate, and the union said that would be wonderful. And the company, absolutely not. They didn't want any interference. They said the governor doesn't know anything about our problems. Well, if you're a mediator, you don't really need to know. You can still be a darn good mediator. So the governor did not have a chance to do anything. We're working into the summer in August and so on. We've got almost constant violence on the line. Several women were run over, one with a broken leg. One of the men was shot in the leg that just happened to be, he wasn't even on the picket line, just nearby. This was a combat veteran that had not been wounded in World War II. And here he is shot in the leg by one of these 24 deputies paid by the company. National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, very influential in their job is to mediate. They're down here and they said the company refuses to bargain in good faith. So they realized from their viewpoint what the problem was. It was the company. We had a lot of trouble and fracases in the nearby towns. In Baird, one of the people that was involved in this strike was Clinton Jinks. He was an organizer and also our union president. And he had been branded a communist. And of course, remember this time period is McCarthyism. If you didn't like your neighbor, all you had to do was kind of point a finger and give a hint, and you could ruin somebody's life. And he had been branded a communist. And so therefore, anybody that had anything to do with Local 890 or the strike were right there. They had the same stigma. Clinton Jinks would go into town to get gas, and one of the local filling station owners would get out, argued with him, punched him, reached through the window and punched him in the face, gave him a black eye, and I think they fined the man $1. Mrs. Jinks had her hair pulled and was kicked and violated, and the lady that did that was also fined, I think just a very few dollars. One of the druggists also attacked Mr. Jinks at the Baird post office and caused a lot of damage. He was also fined $1. It was just a terrible time. We had a lot of violence on the line, the court doings, and this went on. Those women stood strong for another 7.5 months. In January of 1952, the Empire Zinc superintendent was sent back to New Jersey, and a new superintendent took his place. And I think his name was Pettyjohn. Anyway, that seemed to make the big difference right there. Mr. Pettyjohn sat down with the union, and they came to an agreement during January, and the strike was over. Now that was it was 15 months long. We always mentioned a year and 100 days. I had a few personal dealings during this time. All were very favorable. I never had any trouble with the picket line. It was always peaceful when I was there. My dad was an underground miner, and he had leased a mine up in Shingle Canyon above Fierro. And I was born and raised in Santa Rita, of course, and lived with my grandparents. But during that summer, I lived with my dad up at Shingle Canyon, and we went into town on a weekly basis to get supplies for the house and for the mine. And we went through the picket line. And of course, everybody knew my dad because he had been an underground miner all of his life. And we never had a bit of trouble. Fact is, on one kind of a humorous incident, we had went into town in an old pickup to get mine timber. So the whole back of the pickup was loaded up with basically 8x8s and 10x10s, and they were pretty long and extended back behind the end of the pickup. So when we were going back through Hanover, and it was at the upper picket line there by the bridge, and the women were walking their picket line, so we just pulled up, and when we stopped, the load had shifted, and the front wheels of the pickup came off the ground. Well, the women had a good laugh about that, and 3 or 4 of them just stepped up on the front bumper, and back down we came, and my dad got in the back and reshifted the load, and off we went. But never did have any trouble with them. Now, the strike was settled. They did not get their collar to collar pay. They never did. The company agreed on a 53 cents an hour increase where they had asked for 15 cents. Of course, by this time, wages, everything had gone up. We're talking 15 months later. So they gave them 53 cents, and part of this was to compensate for that collar to collar. So when they went back to work, they were the highest paid underground miners in the county. They got $1.89 an hour. Everybody else was being paid $1.74. So that's 15 cents more. So they were a little bit ahead, although it was a terrible time to get there. They got an 18-month contract, but because of the flexibility of the prices of lead and zinc and whatnot, the mine shut down in September. Just 9 months later, the mine shut down again. So these men that had suffered all of this time, this 15 months without wages, were able to work for 9 months, and then they're out of a job again. And the mine was down, let's see, that would have been in 52. Late 52, all of 53 was a real bad time for copper prices and lead and zinc prices. All of the mines, the underground mines, were shut down in 1953. Everything in Grant County. So here's the end of 52, all of 53, and then it wasn't until sometime in 1954 that the mines went back to work, and Empire Zinc miners, but a lot of them had found jobs in other places. Well, in February of 1953, that's approximately a year after the end of the strike, a film crew arrived from Hollywood and wanted to set up and make a documentary about this labor strife because it had been so controversial, and they wanted to document it. Well, as luck would have it, the people that were in this film crew had all been blacklisted from Hollywood for not signing the communist affidavit. So here we go again. Everywhere they would try to set up in the county, people would get out and throw rocks at them and run them off. Well, we had a man that had a small ranch up Gold Gulch in Vanadium. There's 2 gold gulches in Grant County, of course, but there's one that goes through Vanadium right by the US mine. He came down and told him, he says, you guys can all come up to my place and film make your movie, and I'll charge you $1 for it. And of course, Roos was a controversial figure to begin with, but this really put him in the limelight. And so that was where they filmed the movie, but they had a lot of trouble there. The leading man was Juan Chacon, who had been also had been a union president during this time period. The leading lady, Rosaria Revueltas, she was very well known in Mexico. They brought her up here, a beautiful leading lady, but after only a couple of months, conveniently her papers disappeared and she was deported. Luckily, they had enough footage that they were able to finish the film without having to replace her. The sheriff in the movie was Will Greer. He later was very well known in the Walton series. So they filmed for a couple of months and got their film done. Then nobody would show the film when they got it done. Also, there was a lot of violence while they were making this movie. Our Union Hall was set on fire and damaged. One of the union members had his house completely destroyed by fire. Luckily, no one was home. That was the Bostic home in All of this was taking place in 1953. Well, that's pretty well what we've got about that, but let's go up just a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about Clinton Jinks, because he was so controversial. They had branded him a communist and had actually tried and convicted him. He was out on bond, but he was fighting it all through 53 and 54. And then, lo and behold, the man that had testified that that Clinton Jinks was a member of the Communist Party was found out to be an informant for the FBI, and he actually recanted his testimony. So in June of 57, it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court before the decision was reversed on his sentence. But it wasn't until October of that year that all the charges were dropped. And of course, by that time, the man's life had actually been ruined. He was in poor health. Clinton Jinks went to Berkeley, California. I can remember, I can see some union members sitting in the audience. Every year at Christmas time, we got a Christmas card from Clinton Jinks. Let's move up just forward a little bit to 1967. And I use that year because that was the year that I hired out at the Chino mines. I had been working underground as a hard rock miner for a while here locally, and then finally got hired at the truck shop at Chino. In 1967, Chino had 10 unions at the mine in Hurley. There were 2 unions for the train service. They had the locomotive engineer and fireman and the brakeman and switch tenders. At that time, they were still moving all of the ore with trains. The trucks hadn't taken over yet. Excuse me. Had a carpenters union, painters, electricians, the plumbers and pipe fitters had a union. The warehouse had theirs. The machinists union also represented the dozer operators and the shovel runners, the Boilermaker welders, and then of course the local 890 that represented all of the truck shop mechanics and the truck drivers and the laborers. And the truck driver, the local 890 that represented truck drivers and mechanics, we were 100% union. And there were a lot of truck drivers and a lot of mechanics. So this, little by little, all of these unions started going by the wayside, either by attrition, because a few of them, the 2 railroad unions, once the railroads were done away with and haulage was done by trucks, there was nobody, everybody in those unions were transferred to other places. A lot of the guys from the track gang, for example, came into the truck shop as mechanics. And so they were represented by local 890. So the 2 railroad unions were dissolved. Painters union was dissolved when the last 2 guys retired. We had 2 painters and they painted the trucks and everything else. Now, if you'll remember, Santa Rita and Hurley, company towns, they owned all of the houses, or the majority of them. And so they needed electricians, carpenters, painters, plumbers to maintain all of these houses. Well, they got rid of the houses in 1955, so this wasn't no longer needed. They didn't need painters, so that union went by. And all of these other unions were very slowly decertified. Kennecott owned the mine up until 1987. Phelps Dodge came in and took it over. They were trying what they could to get rid of the unions. And then Freeport McMoran came in. And of course, they had mines all over the place, including at Tyrone. They started, remember, we're 100% union in the truck shop and the truck drivers. They started transferring people over from Tyrone, all Morenci. And they were always non-union people that they transferred over. So they started driving a wedge between all of the workers. They came up with a bonus system. They paid the non-union workers a bonus, and the union people did not get any bonus. So little by little, all of these unions were being decertified. When their contract would come up, there was a way that it could be done. You had to have somebody go, I think 33% of the people in that particular union had to sign that they wanted to have a, what am I trying to say here? Where you vote. They wanted to have a vote on whether to keep their union or not. Thank you. And once that came up, you had to have 51% that would vote to decertify. And little by little, that happened. It happened to the electricians. It happened to the carpenters, the plumbers and the pipe fitters, the warehouse, the machinist, the boiler makers. Little by little, between up until, and by 2014, the only union still in place was Local 890. First in, last out. They were finally decertified. Now, as a union member for many years, I knew that this would probably come about someday, but I never thought it would be that soon. So 2014 was a bad day for the unions. Freeport, of course, has mines all over the world, and they're completely union free at this point. We still have a few unions in the county, but absolutely nothing out at the mines. And that's about what I've got. So I'm open for questions. Yes, ma'am. Yes. 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 Juan Chacon was a union member. And when the strike started out, Cipriano Montoya was the president of the union, and Arturo Flores was the vice president. But during the strike, Cipriano was voted out because we voted every year. And Cipriano was voted out and Juan Chacon was voted in. No, during the strike. Yes. Oh, in the making of the film? I'm trying to, who was, do you know? I don't have the list here, but and he may not have. Now he came back again later as our union president for a number of years, even after I was hired in the 1960s. But he may not have been the. Before and after. Yes.
So say your question. We'll have Terry repeat it into the microphone.
Yes, the salt of the earth, and I should have mentioned that, and I apologize. It's available at the Silver City Museum, of course, in probably DVD and CD format. And everybody should see it, yes.
You can see it on YouTube also.
Yes.
It's used in a lot of universities.
Yes, it's available in a lot of the universities.
And on Netflix.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. It's on Netflix. Used to be when we had our places here in town where you could rent movies. It was available.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Can you repeat that question, please,
Yeah.
into the microphone, Tilly?
Okay, say again. How did they meet?
Make ends meet.
Oh, okay. How did the miners make a living during those 15 months? They had the support of all of the other unions. And they also had funds from the international union sent help down financially. But the biggest part of it was from the other members of the of Local 890 and some of the other unions.
Oh, the Baird Co-op? They set up a co-op in Baird?
Yes, they did set up a Baird co-op there in Baird to help out. In other words, buy stuff in bulk and help. Okay, commodities. Yeah, I can remember where that was. Yeah. Thank you, Larry.
Sir?
Yeah, say again. Okay, he's asking about the tin can operators. What did you want to know about them? Okay, yes, a lot of them did do that. I know where you're going now. You got this copper water coming out of Santa Rita and flowing down the creek through Baird, which was actually Whitewater Creek. And it has got a lot of copper in the solution. So people would set up and they would trench this water over into a trough where they could dump tin cans in it and wait a couple of weeks. And the copper in the water would actually dissolve the tin cans and leave a copper mud. And this could be sold, although they had to sell it in El Paso. The company wouldn't buy it because they figured it was theirs to begin with. But a lot of people made, and some of them made a fairly good living. They kept doing it even after the strike was on because the tin can mining was very lucrative. I hope that answered that.
We have to take a small pause because we're recalibrating the microphones.
Okay.
Is this what you want us to do, Marcus? Yeah. And Marcus is new to the AV position. You're probably quite familiar with him from Kuru. He's very involved with the Kuru radio station and a part-time employee at the museum. So we're really happy to have him handle this out.
I got one question. Is Perry still doing the mic?
I haven't done any since COVID shut us down, but I've thought about it. I'll get back on it. I gave a mining tour for many, many years, at least one a month, sometimes 3 or 4 a month.
And when's the next one?
It'll probably be with Will in the next spring. Okay.
Any more questions?
Yes, I see another question.
Well, all right. Am I on?
You're on, Vic.
So I sound better? All right. One of the things that you did mention that I think was very important that the 890 took charge of as security of the kneeling nun. And that was a big thing at one time in our history. And the big movement to do that and a successful movement, even though a lot of people don't know that it was underwritten and instigated by Mill Workers 890.
Yes, yeah, the 890 was very beneficial in that movement in the 1980s. The company wanted to mine where the kneeling nun is. And of course, the local populace was up in arms about it. And they actually stopped the movement so that the company was going to exchange some land for the BLM land that the kneeling nun is sitting on. Okay, give him the microphone. That's Ernie Flores, one of Arturo's sons.
My name is Ernest Flores, and I was very involved in the local union. And I just want to make a mention, I don't know if everybody knew, but the Screen Actors Guild that wouldn't let the company film or process the film was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was the one that was behind a lot of that. And then later on, when he became president, he really took a lot of power out of the unions, and he was instrumental in making the downfall of a lot of the unions because he took the power out of the Labor Relations Act. And I just thought I'd make that comment because it's very important to know some of the politics behind that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie.
Very interesting. I think we have time for one more question and then we will be having our panel discussion.
Thank you. Since this information is all really new to me, I didn't know that there were so many unions. That's very interesting. And I wanted to ask did they all use the Union Hall? Because I recently took a tour through the Union Hall for the first time. And of course, really was looking at all the murals and paintings there. And of course, the mural on the front of the building says Mill Workers 890. So I was interested to learn about all these other unions. Did they all use the Union Hall?
Some of the unions did meet in our union hall. The Carpenters Union actually had their own across the street that was later a medical clinic that Dr. Fowler owned. And then the other unions met in different places.
Okay, and would you like to do that now? Bart has a couple words to say. Our museum director.
Hi, gang. Thanks for coming out today. And Terry, thanks. What a great talk
Thank you, Bart.
to be so connected. But I'd like to recognize. I'd like to recognize a few people in the audience. Ernest Flores already said hello to everybody. Arturo Flores' son. Emily Guerra, who has a fantastic show on KRWG. Elise, and the man behind our present exhibit at the museum is Larry Flores, who kept his father's photographs and sculptures and his life story alive so that and recordings, we could not have the exhibit, The Life and Times of Arturo Flores, at our museum right now.
You're fine.
So please join me in thanking the Flores family. Besides Arturo Flores' amazing impact on our health and well-being of this community and nationwide, he was also a photographer, an amateur photographer, but a wonderfully talented photographer. And his photographs, dozens and dozens of them, were cared for by Larry for many years. And someone mentioned the co-op that the union put together. We have very rare photographs of the inside of that co-op. We have photographs of workers on the picket line. We have photographs of workers during the strike playing washas, right? These are the kind of photographs historians lust after because they're not the kind of photographs that the media takes photographs of, makes. So we have a very, very unique and personal view of this strike and working at the mine. Thanks to Arturo Flores and thanks to Larry Flores and his families for saving it for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. That was a fascinating talk. And you have such a depth of knowledge. We're all really grateful for you for joining us. Wanted to point out also that Union Hall in Bayard is one of the 4 properties that are part of the 5 Points program and going to be preserved as telling a very important part of our story here in Silver City and in the Grant County mining area. Now we're going to have a panelist discussion, and we're going to have Terry take the table also, and Fred Baca. Fred is the director of the New Mexico chapter of LULAC, as I had mentioned. He's a longtime Silver City resident and a 1974 graduate of Western New Mexico. And we had invited Benjamin Slam, a member of the New Mexico Professional Firefighters Association and on our staff here in Silver, but he had another obligation. So I'm going to sit at the table too, just so that we can fill 3 seats, and we will see what types of additional questions people come up with. And Fred is going to be sharing a lot of information and his experience in Silver City during the early decades. Please come to the stage.
Okay, I'll start it out. I'm Fred Baca, lifelong resident of Silver City. Went through all the schools in Silver City as far as elementary, junior high at the time, high school, Western, to my master's. And I come from a different perspective on this. I am not an expert like Dr. Fox or Susan Berry or Mr. Humble or others who did a lot of research and are pretty well schooled on the facts involving the zinc strike. I'm honored to have Lorenzo and relatives here, because they're the ones that could really tell you the story about the strike. But as a young man and growing up in Silver City, I could tell you some of the changes that happened. And I think I would personally attribute a lot of the changes to what happened in the mines, a lot of the advances, not only in the mines, but in education, in housing, jobs, the economy. And I give a lot of credit to what went on in the unions and their struggles. So we need to really pay a lot of tribute to them for what they did. Now, as a young man, I was born right at the time of the Empire Zinc strike. And so I don't have actual knowledge, but my perspective is different because I didn't work in the mines. My dad worked in the mines for 12 years when it was Kennecott. And he came off of a different job and was paid pretty well by the mines because he wasn't used to getting that kind of money at the time. And because of the work that had been done prior through the struggles, he got a lot more benefits as a miner. And they were pretty good, but they just didn't come about automatically because the company was feeling pretty good about it. They came about because of the struggles during the Empire strike. And prior to that, there's a long history. I read this particular book by Ellen Baker on strike and on film, Mexican-American families and blacklisted filmmakers in Cold War America. I recommend, if you want to know something about the Empire Zinc something, this book by Ellen Barker is tremendous, almost like an encyclopedia on what happened. And I think Mr. Humble agrees that it's a pretty good book. In fact, he was interviewed by the author, and the author, I understand, was going to come to the area at one time, but couldn't come. But anyway, so I didn't have any direct situation with the mines, as not having worked in the mines, but I had a lot of relatives that worked in the mines. My wife's dad was killed in the mines. My friend's dad was killed in the mines. I had a very good friend that was killed in the mines. I had many relatives that left the area in the 50s. I believe there was a pretty good strike going on in the late 50s or a down time in the mines. They left for California. So a lot of my relatives ended up over there. You know, the other day, I don't want to keep hogging up the show. The other day, my wife says, come on here quickly. I live out in Silver Acres. And she said, look out there. I said, what? I can't see the kneeling nun anymore. And we could see it from our house. Now you can't see it because it's been mined out. I said, go talk to Nacho Quinones. Let him know. I ran into Nacho the other day at the church and let him know, because it's something that represents the unions. And it was mentioned how hard they fought to keep that rock formation going. And it's still there, but you have to be in a certain area to see it. I ramble a lot, but that's not because I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just my style. I'll ramble on to education. Education changed a lot. When I was younger, we had tracking, what's called tracking. And that's when you have, they go down by grade level achievement all the way down the line. And then junior high was from 7-1, which is your top students, down to 7-5 and 7-6, for example. That leaves a stigma on a person when you're down at the bottom. And I still see people that were in those lower grades, and I still see, and I look at them in a very peculiar way. Or somebody comes up to me and say, oh, you were in 7-2, weren't you? But I think that the changes came because of the minds. We got rid of that tracking system. You know, and I believe, again, it was because of all the good things that these struggling minors and women and families put forth that made these things happen. When I was a young man, going down through the main street, Silver City, it's changed so much. It was not very welcoming. It was not a very welcoming place. It has changed tremendously to where people are welcome. And I think a lot of it is because we've gotten new ideas, new people from the outside, and have changed a lot of the perspectives in Silver City. We have a long ways to go, but I saw changes come, and some of them are good. I was the only one that was happy to see Walmart come in, because Walmart created change in Silver City. It took business from the downtown out into the outer edges of Silver City, which was good because I wasn't happy with the downtown Silver City. There was a group of businessmen that controlled the town. School boards of education, very rare to see a Hispanic on there. Administrators. It was a great moment when Cecilia Vargas or Lily Parra or some of these early pioneers were allowed to teach in Silver City in the early years. So a lot of changes have come, and I go back and I credit the unions. As I read this book, we don't really understand what went on, the suffering that went on with these families, because they're dealing with the economics of the time. They were dealing with the management. They were dealing with conflicts within their own family. Men had to actually babysit, do housework, while the women, their role, and they were very willing to go out there and hold the picket lines. I give them so much credit because it took so much. Courageous people. Arturo Flores, mentioned in the book several times, an icon in this particular time. And, you know, that there was a lot that went on that we don't really know the true story. Yeah, you can read the facts, but you don't know until you talk to some of the people that actually went through some of these things. A good friend of mine, Rachel Valencia, who the young lady that got hit by the automobile, she's alive and well. But you know, there was a lot of little things that went on that we don't see, and only the people that were there can tell you what a terrible time it was. And I surely give these miners their due credit. And one regret I have, a couple of regrets, that the decertification of the Local 890, a historic union. Another one is that our youth, they don't know. They don't know why we have it better today. They don't understand what the unions did. And I think for some reason, it's not taught in the schools. And as an educator, I regret that. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baca.
We have a
Thank you for sharing
question.
your perspective and bringing it all.
We have a question online.
Okay, we have a question online from the Zoom audience.
And it relates somewhat to what Fred was talking about, but maybe for Terry, that it's from Deborah, and she asks, how were Hispanic and Anglo miners treated differently? And was that a factor in the strike?
The wages were different. Way back in the early 1900s, the Hispanic miners were given $1 a day. If you were an Anglo miner, you were paid $3 a day. And this worked all the way up into the times that the unions were formed. So that was one difference. The towns were segregated partially because if you were Hispanic and moved into town, you would naturally want to live next door to someone that was of the same ethnic, the same type of person like a Chicano. But also there was so much our theater in Santa Rita. It was very similar to this setup right here. And I can remember as a kid, if you were an Anglo kid, you sat over there on that side. The middle were for the adults, the Anglos here, the Chicanos were over here. And I always wondered what it would be like to watch the movie from over there. And I never got to, but yes, I hope that answered some of it.
Oh, let's get a microphone over to this question. Thank you, Sarah.
As far as relating to how miners were treated differently, my dad said that they had the train service and the brakemen, they would not hire a Hispanic. And one of the Hispanics put an application, they wouldn't hire him. So they found a guy, an Anglo, who didn't know how to count. But to hire him, what they did is they counted piles of rock because they had to have only 8 cars. If you put more cars, the motor would burn, they would cause problems. So they told the guy, you throw a rock in each car that's loaded, then you get on with the last one. And that's how they were treated differently because they would not hire them. And they would also not hire them they kind of segregated the operators, the big heavy machinery operators.
And the Hispanic miners were more limited to working underground, I've heard, versus it was more Anglo in the operations. Any other questions or comments?
I have a question for Mr. Humble. Remember when they used to bring all that turquoise out of the mines and sell it?
Yes,
Now you
ma'am.
can't even buy earrings anymore.
Yeah, one of our electricians knew where the turquoise deposit was, and he made sure nobody else did.
Yes.
I'm sure there were other people that knew that I never found out, but he would bring that turquoise out, and it was actually sold by the ounce. It was so beautiful. That was in the 1980s specifically, but also before and after. Well, yeah, it's hard to find.
Are the Silver City schools teaching, the history of the Hispanic struggles in this community?
Good question. I have no direct knowledge, but I would think there are maybe some of the history teachers maybe giving it some attention, but not necessarily so, because a lot of times they have to follow the structure of the curriculum. And if it's not in the textbook, they've got to get off of the textbook and produce their own units. And if you've got a very enthusiastic history teacher, they may be able to do it, and they may be doing it now, but I have no direct knowledge whether they're doing it at this time.
The museum has created a partnership with the schools
that Shannon Wilson is heading up that will include the Arturo Flores exhibit.
Okay.
Say it again?
Now, one of the reasons I'm here is because I have been on Mr. Humble's mining tour, but every year out of Leopold Charter School shows Salt of the Earth, and we make it a part of our history curriculum because we feel it's fundamental to being a citizen in Grant County. Yeah.
Thank you.
I understand that even to this day, there's still a lot of struggles between families that were for the unions and against the unions here in Silver City. And also like the strike, the workers that they were called scabs. There was a professor at New Mexico State University, Cecilia Pino, and she's passed away since. And her father was a scab during that time. It affected her throughout her lifetime, and they were from Fierro, not too far away. So are there still families that are against each other because of the strike?
Gentlemen?
I wouldn't know that answer, but I would say I can still run into old timers who have very bad feelings towards the mines. And so I really personally can't answer that question, but I'm sure there are bad feelings and attitudes still going on now.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can give too much more information on that, but there's still a stigma to this day for the people that know who were the strike breakers and who were in the union. They're still, to this day, not that friendly. I can remember when a number of years ago, when the Union Hall was first considered to try to be a museum, the mayors of the different towns, Silver City, Hurley, Baird, Central, met at McDonald's. And I was invited to attend, but I forgot and didn't go. But anyway, they talked about what to do about making the Union Hall a museum, and it came out in the paper. And because my name was mentioned in the article, the day that the paper came out, I immediately got several phone calls, all from Anglos who had been on the non-union side and were against that movement. And both of them were just vehement and said that there was no reason whatsoever to stir all of this up again. So, and that was just a few years ago. There's still a lot of division.
So
There we go.
So Terry, just a follow on to that a question. So one of the arguments I generally agree with that we owe a huge debt of gratitude to unions past and present, but one of the arguments you hear from companies is that it sets up a fighting adversarial relationship between labor and management. You hear it from Amazon and Starbucks and everybody else.
Walmart.
Do you think that by decertifying the unions, there's a more cooperative relationship between labor and union now? Labor and company?
Well, I'm no longer up at the mine, so I don't know. I imagine that is, if a company treats your men good, you don't need a union. And so right now, they're probably on their best behavior, and I hope they keep going, because if they don't, the unions someday will reorganize. I don't know if that answered any of your question or not, and I'm sure Ernie can expand on that.
Okay, in 2004, I guess, when they shut down, 2004, when they shut the mine down, we had the big layoff. I went to school in here in Las Cruces. I got my degree. And I ended up in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and working for Intel to do the idea of treating the employees well. We were well compensated. We had ample opportunity. They would meet with us on a regular basis. And we were asked if we had questions and so my comment about it would be this, that it was up to us individually, but the idea of, I'll put the fear the company had of a union organizing kept them in line, but we were well compensated to that point. And that's all I have.
Thanks. I have one offer to make and one question. So the offer is, I'm a bit of a carpetbagger. I'm born and raised in New York in a Catholic family. Was an altar boy for a long time. But I worked at a labor museum in New Jersey, very similar to the Silver City Museum and Historic House. And we would often get school kids come to our museum not even knowing what a union was, not even knowing that there's a possibility to organize and work collectively. So labor history is a really important part of what it means to be an American and in a civilized country. We also showed Salt of the Earth almost every year as part of our film series at the museum. And I'm so excited to be here where it actually happened and to meet people who were involved. So I would offer any help folks need to get a labor museum started. The Silver City Museum would be very interested in helping make that happen. And me personally, with my experience at what was known as the American Labor Museum in Paterson, New Jersey. So here's my question. Growing up in a Catholic family, I learned later that my father, as a young man, was part of an organized campaign to discredit labor leaders in my hometown in New York. The parish priest bought cans of red paint, gave it to these young men, and pointed out where the labor leaders were. There were also undertones of anti-Semitism and other sort of issues. But I wondered, so I said, Dad, really? I couldn't believe it, but it was part of life in the 50s where people were split up by being defamed as being communist. I wondered here locally, did the Catholic Church play any role in the Salt of the Earth strike?
It was a priest, right?
Get him the microphone. Get that man a microphone.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but during the streak, there was a priest who was friendly to the strikers. Fred, you know that guy's
Couple
name?
of them, Father Lene, I think from Silver City. Father Lene, I believe it was his name. And there was another one that's Estivil, Terry says. So yeah, there was plenty of support from the churches, from the Catholic churches for this, yeah.
And I'll bet
For the miners, they
Yes.
backed up the miners and the unions.
And I'll bet the strike broke down to Catholic strikers and Protestant bosses, more or less. Obviously, there were some Catholic bosses, but I'll bet the bosses, Jacqueline wasn't there anymore, but in general, I bet the bosses were Protestants and the strikers were Catholic, roughly speaking. No?
Very possible.
Yeah. I got another question, if I may. When 890 voted to decertify itself, I've heard there was a generational aspect that the guys who wanted to decertify were younger and the older guys who remembered the bad old days, they wanted to keep the union. Is that right?
Of course, the older people, the older ones in that were still in the union had been active all of that time. The younger ones had been brought over from the other places like Ajo and Morenci and Tyrone. And maybe they wanted a majority, but they had convinced enough of the people that they had the 51% vote to decertify. But that's exactly true.
And I know I've already commented, I guess. The comment I would have would be what the unions wanted in one of the effects was education. And I think that most of us became very well educated. And the leaders moved on, and I think we left a vacuum. And that's a possibility. The other thing is we talk about education. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is age and how companies can't hire kids at a certain age. And my grandfather, Archuleta on my mom's side, we were talking about it, but I remember one time I was actually asking him, and he was one of the oldest living members of, working members of the Phelps Dodge coal mining camp in Dawson, New Mexico. And he had worked for 44 years. And I asked him, well, how is that possible? He said he was like 12 or 14 years old and he started working. And he said his first job was grading coal, but he was 12 or 14 years old, and that was common. And now they don't do it. And that's one of the things that the labor union and labor movement has laws. The other thing was my dad talked about a story, and I don't know if it's in the museum, but he said he was hired, and then he said the foreman came in and says, well, I want you to move that stuff over there. And he said, with what? And he said, you want the job? You figure it out. And so it comes to safety and training. And that's another important thing that we have to look at as far as labor unions, labor training, education, and the labor movement. Thank you.
Does anybody else have a burning question or something to say? Well, I think we've had a good time and interesting experience exploring the unions, what they were in Grant County, and then a little bit of the situation today. A lot of food for thought, and unionization, of course, is a topic that is in the news every day today, huh? The railroad strikers, the railroad employers may go on strike, Starbucks, the airlines, so it's still a hot topic. And remembering the past informs us to go forward into the future, I think. So just in wrapping up our program, we had mentioned that there is the Tom Lyons talk by Stephen Fox. Will is conducting that over on the college campus on Wednesday. A little more information on the Will website on that. I'd like to ask you to join us again for our last fall program on November 19th. We'll have Doug Dinwiddie, many of you know him. He's taking on the interesting topic of the early Wild West era of Grant County, investigating frontier justice. And I'd like to thank everybody who helped. It takes a small village, or a Pequeno El Pueblo. Alan Reagans with Will. Out front, you met Susan Price, our steadfast volunteer here at the museum. Marcus Hansen, thank you for handling the AV. Sarah Zamora is in charge of community engagement at the museum. We also had Joe Lutz and Aiken McLean helping us with technical aspects of the program. Thank you, Kim Ryan with the Silco Theater for providing us access and help. And finally, thank you to Bart Rosselli, the museum director, for providing guidance to us through these programs. Thank you very much.